Think about that cliche of thinking about something through the eyes of a child, seeing something for the first time. The wonder and curiosity and intensity or awe with which children experience something that we as adults have lost. There's so much excitement that my kids have over finding a worm or a ladybug. So those are things that I have ceased to find so much wonder at, except for to show it to them so they're very excited. Things that seem so ordinary to me. There's awe in bubbles. Those magical things that float in the air but are so fragile they disappear if you touch them. Not every experience of seeing things through the eyes of a child is, I'm not sure what they're doing, is lovely or beautiful though. I remember this last 4th of July when Annabelle experienced fireworks for the first time. She was completely overwhelmed and terrified. We were outside in the dark past bedtime, and the fireworks were loud and bright and unexpected, and it was way too much for her to comprehend. Her first experience of fireworks didn't have the layers of meaning and experience that I have put onto my experience of fireworks over a lifetime of the 4th of July with family and friends. The way we experience things for the first time is so different than later when we have added those layers of meaning and understanding and wrapped them around an event or experience. I remember this each Easter because there is this huge gulf between our theology and understanding of Easter and what we read in the gospel accounts of Easter morning. I just realized that door's open. Can you shut it? Because they're like right through there in Sunday school. Thank you. There is a distinct separation between the joy and excitement that we bring to this day and to worship and to the empty tomb, and the firsthand account of those women who are perplexed and afraid and grief-stricken. We see such beauty and hope and joy in a day that are noticeably absent from the disciples' experience that first Easter morning. We read in Acts a sermon by Peter that he preaches on Pentecost. We hear the ways that Peter has begun to make sense of Easter and understood it in the 50 days that followed. Once Jesus had appeared to him and to the other disciples again and again and again, teaching and reteaching them, preparing them to give witness and testimony to all that Christ had done, including the resurrection. But that meaning and understanding are missing on that first Easter day, when the women boldly venture out as soon as they are able to attend to Jesus' body. I say boldly because Jesus has been executed by the state as a dangerous insurgent. He has gathered crowds of followers who call him their king. He preached a new order for the world and called for the overturning of empires and the establishment of a new kingdom. On Easter morning, the 11 disciples are hiding in a locked room, uncertain what their own fates might be. Will the political and religious powers be satisfied with taking out the top leader of the Jesus movement, or will the disciples also be deemed too dangerous? Will the government target them next? The women, though, refuse to deny their allegiance to Jesus. They may be afraid, but they still show up faithfully to care for their lost leader and teacher and friend. Regardless of the potentially deadly consequences of their acts of love and care for Jesus' body. Boldly, they head to the tomb to anoint his body, though danger and threats surround them. And then the tomb is empty. Perplexed must be an understatement of how they felt. It's no wonder they are terrified by the men in dazzling clothes. Did they wonder if they had walked into a trap? Perhaps they bow less to show honor and regard for the angels and more in surrender to whatever authority they think has shown up to arrest them and punish them for continuing to care for and follow Jesus, who, after all, was judged as so dangerous that he was tortured and executed in the most shameful way possible. I wonder how they can hear the words of the angel amidst their fear, and how they can process the meaning of those words. Luke moves so quickly from the words of the dazzling beings to the women remembering what Jesus had told them, and then the women returning to the other disciples. But I want to linger in their story for a bit, with these most faithful and brave of Jesus' followers, with these first witnesses of the resurrection. Did the words of the angels miraculously impart understanding? Or did the women perhaps stay at the tomb for a while, processing what they were seeing? An empty tomb and two dazzling beings. And processing what they were hearing, why do you look for the living among the dead? How long did it take them to realize that the dazzling beings were not a threat? Then how long to raise themselves off the ground? Imagine the looks that might have passed between them, between Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women. Confusion, bewilderment, fear, questioning, doubt, and then maybe a bit of hope. I wonder if one of these women in particular led them into hope. If one of them encouraged the others to remember what Jesus had said and believe in this impossible outcome, that Jesus had conquered death and was alive again. Who was the first to say that the impossible might be possible in God, in Jesus? Then which of these women led the others from the tomb, from the place of the dead, back toward the place where God was calling them among the living? To the disciples, to the place where they give the first account, the first witness. Are the dazzling beings there with them as they move through terror and bewilderment to remembering and understanding? Or do they disappear and leave the women to puzzle together what they are experiencing? Do the women run back to the disciples? Do they walk slowly, speaking to each other in whispers as they sort through their questions and hope? Or do they stumble back, still confused and in a daze? When they've returned to the place where those disciples are hiding out, they are met with disbelief. Their words are dismissed as an idle tale. We have layers of sexism as experienced today that we would read into this. The word hysterical comes to mind, a word used primarily to describe women, and a word whose origin comes from the Greek word for womb, which is supposedly the source of women's uncontrollable emotions. We know that gender equality did not exist in Jesus' ancient context. Is this why the disciples did not believe the women? We can't be certain about that. They are announcing a rather unbelievable thing. And though the 12 disciples are all men, we know that there are many women within that inner circle of Jesus' followers and friends. We know this because the women are the ones at the foot of the cross and at the tomb at sunrise on Easter morning. There were women among Jesus' closest companions, even though the gender equality of the context erases much of their story and perspective from the records that we have received. We can surmise, though, that they are respected enough among those disciples that at least Peter believes them, or he wants to believe them, enough that he is willing to take the same risk that the women took in going to the tomb that first Easter morning. When we linger in the story of Easter morning, it's so clear that our joy and excitement and celebration today are not what they felt at all. That the flowers and colorful eggs and candy and sweet baby bunnies and chicks that we associate with Easter are not symbols or associations original to Easter, that first Easter day, or even close to the context of that first Easter experience. In the Easter moment of Revelation 2,000 years ago, there is confusion and shock and disbelief. Even though Easter resurrection is an astoundingly huge revealing of God's power and work in the world, those who knew Jesus best and most intimately, who heard his every sermon and witnessed all the miracles, even they could not see and understand the immediate experience of God. Rather, Jesus appears to them again and again and again on Easter and in the coming days and weeks. Jesus meets two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they need an entire explanation of Jesus' teachings all over again. And then they still don't recognize him until he breaks bread with them. Jesus appears in a locked room to the disciples, and they still don't know what to do next. So they return to fishing. And Jesus appears on the shore and calls them back from their boats, explaining yet again the work and the ministry he is calling them to. The Easter revelation is not a one-time event, it is ongoing. Even though Easter is huge, the overcoming of death, the power of God and of life, it can still be hard to see God in the moment. It can still be hard to know and to understand what God is doing or where God is in any particular moment. If this is true in something as huge as Easter, then we should give ourselves a little grace, don't you think? As we seek to see and hear and feel God in the smaller Easter moments now. As our church seeks to discern where God is calling us next, we may struggle to perceive God in the moment. To know, no less to understand, what God is doing or where God is in any particular moment. As you figure out the shape of your own life in the wake of the upheaval of COVID, you may wonder where God is and what God is doing. And it may feel so hard to connect to the Holy Eternal in a particular moment, or to understand where God is leading you. But we can remember those disciples made sense of that huge Easter moment in pieces, through the constant and patient grace of God that never left them. They were able to look back on that Easter day and all of Jesus's appearances to them and all the meals they continued to eat with the risen Christ, and then slowly understood Easter more fully. And they slowly understood God's calling and their role to give witness to love and forgiveness and grace, to testify to the power of life in all the good that Jesus did and all the healings, and the power of life even and especially in the face of death. We too may look back on this time of uncertainty as a congregation or as individuals and see more clearly in retrospect where God was at work and how God is leading and calling us. We don't have to understand it in full right now. We can instead take each step in faith, placing our hope and trust in God's continued faithfulness. As that hymn goes, we know that God has been our help in ages past and will be our hope for years to come. And we get to see Easter in retrospect and know that wherever God leads us, it is toward God's dream for the world, toward the flourishing of life, toward justice and peace and grace and love, toward the thriving of all life and all creation. No matter your questions or doubts or uncertainties today, May you breathe the peace and comfort of the knowledge that God is with us and guiding us toward goodness and love. Amen.